Raymond Ellison had 6 weeks left to live, and he had spent one of them arguing with a hospice nurse about a comedy show. He wanted to see Katt Williams one time before he died. Everybody around him said no. His daughter, his doctor, the paperwork, the oxygen. And on a Friday night that October, 18,000 people at a sold-out arena in Atlanta rose to their feet and went completely, unnaturally silent because of what a comedian did when he found out a dying man was sitting in the dark at the end of aisle 14. October 2023, State Farm Arena, downtown Atlanta. A Katt Williams tour date that had been sold out for months. The kind of night the man in the pressed suit did in his sleep by then. Arenas, not clubs. But nobody in that building had ever seen him stop a show cold. Not once. Not for anybody. He stopped it that night. And the reason was a 71-year-old man who almost didn't make it through the door. Denise Carter had been a hospice nurse for 19 years, and she had a rule she never broke. You don't get attached. You can't. You sit with people through the last part of the road, you make them comfortable, you hold the hand, and then you let go. Because if you carry every one of them home with you, there'll be nothing left of you by 50. She broke the rule for Raymond. She couldn't help it. Raymond Ellison was 71, a retired city bus driver who had spent 34 years driving the same Atlanta routes, and he was, hands down, the funniest patient she had ever had. The cancer was in his bones, and he was down to skin and a rasp of a voice, and he still had her laughing so hard in that little room that the other nurses would poke their heads in to see what was going on. He'd say, "Denise, I've been dying for 8 months, and you people still won't let me have a cigarette. What are you saving me for?" She'd laugh telling it, years later, and then her eyes would do something else. Raymond had one thing on his wall. Not family photos. He had those on the nightstand. On the wall, where he could see it from the bed, was a cutout of Katt Williams in a purple suit, taped up crooked by a man too weak to reach. "That man," Raymond told her one afternoon, tapping the picture with a finger like a twig, "is the last thing I want to laugh at. I've been laughing at him 20 years. I want to do it one more time. In the room. Not on the TV. In the room." Denise said what nurses sang. "We'll see. Let's get your numbers up first." But Raymond didn't have time for "we'll see." And the thing that happened at the end of aisle 14 3 weeks later, Denise has spent the rest of her life trying to explain it to people. And she says she still can't do it justice. Getting Raymond to that arena was, in Denise's words, "the dumbest, most beautiful thing I ever did in my career, and I'd have lost my license for it." The doctors said no. The daughter, Angela, said no first and loudest. She was terrified her father would die in a parking garage surrounded by strangers, and who could blame her? There was the oxygen tank. There was the wheelchair. There was the fact that a man that fragile in a crowd of 18,000 was a genuinely bad idea. Denise sat with Angela in the hallway for an hour. "I told her the truth," Denise said. "I said, 'Your daddy is going to die. I can't change that. But I can maybe give him one Friday. And 30 years from now, you're going to be glad he got the Friday.'" Angela signed the release with a shaking hand. They rigged it. A paramedic friend came off the clock in his own car to ride along in case. a small portable tank, a wheelchair. 2 tickets in the accessible section that Angela had bought the second the tour was announced, back when she still thought, "We'll see," meant yes. Section 114, end of aisle 14, on the flat, near the floor. Raymond wore a suit, insisted on it. A gray suit that hung off him now like it belonged to a bigger man, which it had 8 months ago. He had Denise knot the tie 3 times until it sat right. "If I'm going to see the sharpest dressed man in America," he rasped, "I'm not showing up looking like a patient." They got him into the building at 6:50. He was gray under the house lights, and his breath was a wet machine. But Raymond was lit up like a boy. 34 years driving a bus through this city, and he'd never once been inside this arena. "Look at all these people, Denise," he kept saying. "Look at all these people." He had no idea that in about 90 minutes, all 18,000 of them would be looking at him. The show started loud and stayed loud. Katt came out sharp as a blade, worked the whole room, did voices, did whole characters, built and built the way he does, and 18,000 people forgot they had jobs and problems and Monday. Raymond laughed. That was the thing Denise came for, and she got it. She got 20 minutes of the real thing. Raymond doubled over, as far as a man that sick can double over, wheezing, slapping the armrest, tears on his face for the good reason instead of the bad one. And then, around the 40-minute mark, she watched him start to fade. She knew the look. She'd seen it 100 times, and she hated that she could see it now. The laughing got quieter. His head started to list toward his shoulder. His color went from gray to something worse. She leaned in and checked him, and his numbers were dropping. And she made the call every hospice nurse dreads to make, the one where you decide the beautiful thing is over, and now you have to protect the person from it. I told him, "Raymond, we have to go. We have to go now, baby." And Raymond, barely above a whisper, still watching the stage, said, "Not yet. Not yet, Denise. I'm not done." She started to move his chair anyway, because that's the job. And that's when it happened. Because you cannot move a wheelchair out of the accessible section of an arena without the whole aisle noticing. People stood to let them pass, a little ripple of movement in a dark room full of stillness. And up on that stage, mid-sentence, under lights that should have blinded him to everything past the 3rd row, Katt Williams saw it. He stopped. Not a pause. He stopped. 18,000 people, and a comedian at the absolute top of his powers just stopped talking in the middle of a bit and shielded his eyes against the lights and looked down the length of aisle 14 at an old man in a gray suit being wheeled toward the exit. The room didn't know what was happening. There's a specific sound a huge crowd makes when the thing on stage goes off script. A low, confused murmur, thousands of people turning to each other at once. Denise froze with her hands on the chair. She thought she'd done something wrong. She thought they were in trouble. Then Katt spoke, and his voice had come all the way down out of the show. "Hold up," he said. "Hold up. Where's my man going?" Denise couldn't speak. It was Raymond who answered. Raymond, who had driven a bus through this city for 34 years and knew how to make his voice carry even now, lifted his twig of a hand and called out, cracked and clear across the silence, "I gotta leave before you, man. I'm on a schedule you wouldn't believe." For 1 second, the whole arena held its breath. And then Katt Williams laughed. The real one. Threw his head back on that stage and laughed. And 18,000 people laughed with him out of pure relief. And he pointed down that aisle and said, "Now that is the funniest man in this building, and he ain't even paying me." The room roared, but Katt wasn't done. He held up a hand, and it went quiet again, and he said, "Nah, for real, bring him back. Bring him down here. Y'all mind if we make room for him?" 18,000 people did not mind. They brought Raymond down to the floor. Security cleared a path. Strangers reached out to touch his shoulder as he passed, the way people do when they don't have words and use their hands instead. Denise pushed the chair with tears running straight off her chin, and the paramedic walking beside her going, "Numbers are holding, go!" And Raymond sitting up now, sitting up straight, some last reserve of something lifting him upright in that too big gray suit. They set him at the front, right at the lip of the stage, and Katt Williams crouched down on the edge of that stage in front of 18,000 people and gave a dying bus driver a private conversation in the middle of an arena show. Nobody heard all of it. The mic was down at his side, but people close enough said Katt asked the man his name, and Raymond told him. And Katt used it, Raymond, twice, the way you do. And then the two of them just talked. And Raymond laughed his last big laugh at something only he got to hear. Then Katt stood up, and he did something Denise says she will never, as long as she lives, get over. He took off the pocket square. The sharp folded square of silk from the breast of that famous suit. The whole armor of the sharpest dressed man in comedy. And he leaned down and tucked it into the breast pocket of Raymond's gray suit, and patted it flat, and said into the microphone so the whole building could hear him, "There, now you're dressed." 18,000 people came to their feet, and they did not cheer. They stood, and they were silent. That unnatural, enormous silence, the kind a crowd only makes when it understands it is watching something it will tell people about for the rest of its life. Denise said it was the loudest silence she ever stood inside of. Raymond sat at the front of it in his pocket square and cried, and did not once look embarrassed. Raymond Ellison died 19 days later, at home, in his own bed, under the crooked picture of the man in the purple suit. Denise was there. So was Angela, who had signed the shaking release and gotten her Friday after all. Near the end, when Raymond couldn't say much anymore, he'd tap the pocket square. He'd made them pin it to the wall next to the cutout, silk against paper. And he'd get a look on his face that Denise, in 19 years of hospice work, had never once seen at the end of the road. "I've sat with a lot of people when they go," Denise said. "Most of them are scared. Most of them are looking back, counting what they missed. Raymond wasn't looking back. That man died like somebody who'd just won something." At the funeral, Angela had planned to fold the pocket square into her father's breast pocket, bury him dressed. Then, the night before, she couldn't do it. She kept it, because she said a thing that ends up in the ground is gone, and she couldn't stand for this to be gone. It's framed now, in Angela's front hall, where most people hang a mirror. A square of gray silk behind glass, with a little card underneath it that Angela typed and printed and cut out herself. The card says, "For 19 days, my father was the best-dressed man in Atlanta." It took Denise almost a year before she could tell the whole thing without stopping in the middle. She tells it now on purpose. She tells it to the new nurses, the young ones, the ones who show up to hospice work with the same rules she used to have. Don't get attached. Don't carry them home. And she tells them the rule is a lie you tell yourself so the job doesn't cost you anything, and that the job is supposed to cost you something. She tells them about aisle 14, about the numbers dropping and the beautiful thing being over, and how she'd already decided to protect an old man from the last good night of his life, because that was the safe call and the smart call, and it was the job. "I was 3 seconds from wheeling him out that door," she says. 3 seconds. If that man on the stage doesn't look down at exactly the right second, Raymond dies 19 days later, never knowing what almost happened. It only worked because somebody was paying attention to the one person in the room nobody was supposed to be watching. People always ask her the same question. They ask if Katt Williams ever knew, if anybody ever told him the old man in the gray suit died 3 weeks later, that the pocket square hangs framed in a hallway, that a dying man got to leave the road laughing because a comedian stopped an arena to notice him. Denise doesn't know. She never found a way to reach him. She thinks about it sometimes, writing the letter, finding the address, telling the man what he did. But then she thinks about what Raymond called back across that silent arena, the last joke he ever told to a crowd. And she figures maybe some things don't need to be delivered to land. "I got to leave before you, man. I'm on a schedule you wouldn't believe." He left first. He left dressed. And he left laughing. If this story reached something in you, take a second to subscribe and leave a like. It helps these untold stories find the people who need them most. And tell us in the comments, have you ever watched someone do one small thing that gave a stranger their dignity back? We read every one.